things, and we learned how to model various things about water networks, not only the hydraulics. Then we'll identify the major control objectives that are the main challenges in controlling the water network. And I'm talking, by the way, about the transportation part of the network, not the service network, not the part, the system of pipes that delivers water to the final consumers, but the intermediate from the lakes or rivers that transport the water, and this is quite very costly in pumping. Then we'll see how to make decisions under uncertainty, because actually we don't know many things. We cannot measure and we cannot know in advance the future water demand from the consumers. And finally, we'll see a few things about how to solve such huge dimension problems that arise when formulating control problems for these systems. So this is the mental map of the presentation today. Right about here, algorithms will be quite clumsy, but then this will pay off with some very nice simulations in the end. So what is there to model? First of all, naturally, we have the physical part of the model, that is hydraulic equations, mass balances, so on and so forth. Second, we have time series. We have measurements of water demand. We have measurements of observations of time prices, if at least it is not a fixed price model. And we need also to predict and to know throughout a horizon of the next day what the prices will be, what the water demand will be every single hour. Then we need to model uncertainty, because having just a model which we trust, or having just a forecasting model that will give us future water demands, which we trust absolutely, it's kind of folly, because we always have errors, and often, if not always, these are considerably high. Then we have constraints that we need to model. We need to take into account that tanks do not have infinite capacity, that pumps also don't have infinite pumping capacity, and so on and so forth. Also, there are constraints associated with pressure drops. And finally, we need also to model, formulate mathematical equations, and to quantify our objectives. Then, this is what I'll be talking about today. We have the water network, measurements going into a controller, which decides how to operate the network automatically, while at the same time we have water demand, which is uncertain, as we say, which means we can measure it, but we don't know its future evolution, and electricity prices. So I think you got the overall picture, and here I'd like to start with a literature overview, a taxonomy of what people have been doing, where we stand, and what is state of the art and what is beyond that. So we have traditionally open loop techniques, where the night before, usually, some engineers sit in a room, do some math, or with the use of some software, make a plan for the next day. Then they give it on a piece of paper to the personnel, and this is what you will do. No contingency plan. Whatever happens, figure out how to fix it by yourselves, by playing around with valves and with pumping actions. Okay, there is no feedback, and this creates many problems. It calls for human intervention very often, and it is suboptimal in the sense that we can do a lot better. Then we have closed loop, which is quite the opposite. It is every time we make a decision, we see what happens, and we reconsider, and again and again. And this can be also done automatically. And then a special class of closed loop control is model predictive control, which is exactly like playing chess. So you make a move by predicting what your sequence of moves will be and what the opponent's sequence of moves will be. And then you make the first move and you see whether the opponent responds, acts, plays the way you expected. And maybe there you also have a contingency plan as well, meaning that if the opponent plays that, I will play like this afterwards, whereas, so on and so forth. Okay. Certainty equivalent means that we trust that the opponent will play in a very particular way that we believe we know. Okay, this is certainty equivalent predictive control. Of course, we can do better than that by taking the worst case. Like, what is the worst case? What is the most intelligent, let's say, move that the opponent movement might do, or sequence of moves, to be more precise. And we have worst case, however, what's the problem with worst case? It's kind of rare that this happens. It's kind of rare that everybody in the city will open their taps and let the water flow, as well as for them to switch off everything and not consume any water. Okay. Stochastic, however, here takes like the most expected outcome, the most expected behavior of the system, but also keeps into account other less likely scenarios. And finally, we have risk averse. I'll talk about that later. This hasn't been done yet, so if you're a PhD student, or if you're looking for some interesting problems, risk averse problems are very promising. So to model, to control, and to solve, because if we formulate a lovely mathematical problem, but no software can solve it, and this is the case now, this is what has prevented the introduction of this technology in water utility companies, then such problems that are technically unsolvable or require 5 hours to solve them are not to be considered. Control now. So a little bit of introduction, and then I'll explain how MPC works. Now then, I made this up. It is a system of a few tanks, and these are valves. This is a pump here, and these are water sources, and these here are demands. And in the control parlance, these are actuators. This is the actuation of the system. Okay, this is what we can do. This is how we can intervene in the system and change its dynamics. These are demands. These are sources of uncertainty. These are states. Okay, how much water we store, and these things here, these nodes will give rise to some observable conditions. I'm just mentioning it. Nothing great. Now, our case study is this one. It is the water network of Barcelona. So it's like many subsystems interconnected. Here we have right about 63 tanks, 114 pumping stations. I mean, it is quite large. Okay.
Sorry, how many states and how many control variables?
63 states, 114 control variables, 17 algebraic conditions, and 88.
It's written there, yes. Sorry, thanks.
And well, now if we write down very simple mass balance equations, meaning what comes in minus what comes out equals to the accumulation rate, things like that, okay? Nothing to, no rocket science. Then we'll come up with this equation, plus this one here, okay? And the system constraints are very easily represented by minimum and maximum values. We should not drain the tank, of course, so there should be 0. We shouldn't overflow it, so on and so forth. Simple things so far. Then such models, however, they look simplistic, they look tremendously simple. However, using them, we can really obtain a very good result. Here we see real data from the water network of Barcelona and simulations with the model. It's not perfect, but for control purposes, it is perfect. Okay, we don't need a super accurate model for control, and this is a major advantage of MPC. Then demand forecasting. We're done with hydraulic modeling. We don't need to know about mass transport and fluid dynamics and so on. For control, this is fine. Demand forecasting. So we have future demand, which we don't know, is equal to some estimate thereof plus some error. Okay, very simple. How we obtain the estimate is not very interesting. I mean, we can do it with RMA, we can do it with neural networks, with whatever we like. But the concept I would like to keep from here is that we have a nominal prediction, okay, and we have some error. We don't know the error, but we may know something about either. I'll move on to the next slide. We may have now various approaches here. We may neglect it whatsoever. Okay, we may say that this is more or less 0. We don't care about it. Now we may say that we have error bounds, that the error cannot be in absolute values. Let's say it would be between 0 and 5, something like that. Okay. Another approach is to say that every error, the one step ahead prediction error, follows a normal distribution. And the two step ahead prediction error follows another normal distribution. Now we have made one clear assumption here, the normal distribution, the normality, and a tacit assumption. But the second error has a distribution that is totally irrelevant and uncorrelated to the first one. Okay, not very realistic. Still not very bad approach. And four, to say that we have a sequence of errors. Okay, error at 0 is 0, because we know exactly the demand now at time 0. One step ahead, two steps ahead, n steps ahead. Say that this is in general a random variable. And we'll treat it as a discrete random variable. I'll give you more details in what follows. So now, these are bounds. Okay, this is a nominal prediction, and these fine lines here represent the plus or minus what we expect the actual demand to be within. Okay, these are normal distributions, like normal, like there is a sequence of normal distribution which moves on in the future, and kind of spreads, of course. I mean, it becomes more and more uncertain what demand will have in the future. And here is a bunch, a spaghetti of scenarios, al dente, okay, which is real data. I mean, this is the most realistic thing we can have here. These are reproduced from real observations, Monte Carlo style, if you like. Okay, and we'll be working with these constructs here, which are very nice. And okay, that's it. So far we've talked about hydraulic modeling with very easy concepts like mass balances and stuff, and about forecasting and uncertainty, and how we deal with that. Let's see now what the objectives are, so as to move on and formulate a control problem. So first of all is to operate the network economically. B, to operate cheaply. Okay. So we have an economic cost, which is associated with our pumping actions, UK. Okay. Then we have a smooth operation cost, which quantifies, penalizes how much we switch on and off the pumps and the valves all the time. Because if we keep actuating and switching on and off all the time, the equipment will wear out and it will go haywire. And third, the safety operation cost. It makes sense for many reasons to keep, if possible, the water in the tanks above a certain safety level, let's say 30, 40% or 20, it doesn't matter. This makes sure that we'll maintain a minimum pressure in the network, and also that we don't risk that we'll drain the tank at some point, which might cause problems. And finally, the total cost. I mean, it's all these costs summed up together. You can even have here some coefficients if you like. Okay, and this is the total cost. This is how we quantify how well a control action, how good the control action is, and how good its result is in the network, meaning the level of water in the tanks. Let's see now how we make, how we formulate MPC problems and how we choose our control actions. So let's say somebody proposes a sequence of control actions from now till some future time where we know the current state of the system, and we predict that this will be the state evolution. So we need, given this sequence, we need to have a way, a measure, which quantifies how good this picture is. So let's say that this is right about this good, okay? Then somebody else proposes some other control action, some other sequence, and this produces this result. And this is worse, according to our measure. I'll tell you what this B is a little bit later, okay? Now this is a lot better, okay? With this sequence of control actions, we can do a lot better. And this produces an infinite cost. I mean, this is totally prohibitive. Why is that? Because we have a violation here. So one thing to keep in mind is that by this very little trick, we encode constraints in a simple function we call V, and quantifies how good our plan is. Okay, And among those decisions, there is this sequence of decisions which produces this sequence of states, which leads to a minimum cost. And guess what? This is what we're going to use, and we're going to use this only this first control action and give it to the system, and then we'll move on, see what happens, and reconsider, and so on and so forth. How do you like this? Okay, maybe perplexes you a little bit, but it's nothing more than defining V as the summation of our total cost from now until the future. Okay, subject to the system dynamics, the algebraic constraints, the other constraints, and given the measurement we have from the system, xk. I don't want to draw your attention too much to that. I just want to say here that this procedure for making decisions can be very elegantly written down in equations, which are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 equations which formulate this minimization problem. However, in the problem I showed you right now, we didn't consider the uncertainty at all, but there is some uncertainty. So we know that the demand now is this here, okay, this orange point. As time goes on, we predict some demands by taking, let's say, for simplistic intervals, worst case scenarios in a way. Okay, so we have minimum and maximum values for the demand. Now, if we reflect this onto the state sequence, then we say that if we make this sequence of control actions, if this is how we'll be behaving from now until some future time n-1, then this is how we expect our state to evolve. Of course, we cannot draw a single line, but we can draw like a tunnel in which our state will move. And this, of course, then will lead to multitude of costs for each line in that tunnel. In any way you may drive inside here, and we take the maximum, we take the worst case. This is why we call it worst case MPC. And of course, among all those things, we take the minimum worst case. Okay, and this is our worst case problem formulation. But we won't be working with such problems because they are very conservative, and also they are very computationally intensive and combinatorially expensive. These formulations. I mean, take the maximum here in a space of very high dimension. You have to enumerate vertices, you have to do such things, which is not very efficient. I'll skip that. Let's see now how stochastic MPC works. Let's say we have a state here. We measure it. We know our volumes in our tanks, and we know the current water demand. Now we say we will not draw a sequence of control actions, but instead we'll be making a contingency plan step by step. So if I make this decision here, okay, then I will have this exact evolution of my state at stage 1. However, after 1 hour, I don't know what the water demand will be. It may be any of those, with a probability, of course. I mean, it seems here that this is more likely, this is less, and so on. Okay. Now, among these possible outcomes, if this happens, okay, then this will lead to this future state. I mean, I will have to take this decision, and then I will have this much water. Whereas if this happens, then I will take another decision, and this will lead to another state. Okay, so implicitly here, I'm formulating a tree of decisions as I move forward. And if this happens then I have some other possibilities. If this occurs, and so on. Okay, so here is the tree, and here is a tree of control actions, scenario 3, and this is a tree of possible future states. And all these now, you remember previously we drew a line here, V, of the total cost, how we assess this picture. Here I drew it here, and we have a distribution of costs where we take the average cost. If I draw line here, then you have the maximum cost. Okay, the worst case. This is the worst case. This is the average case, and this here could be possibly even the deterministic case, which leaves outside all these costs. I mean, you predict like you will pay 1 cent, and you may end up paying maximum 1,000 euros, and the average can be 500. Okay, something like that. And this is the formulation of our problem, where you see here that I have replaced simply V by its expectation. And all the rest are more or less the same. Now let's be a little bit more precise, because we'll be concluding MVC. Okay, so this is called scenario-based model predictive control. And our basic here tool for formulating a problem that is solvable is a so-called scenario tree. So we have, this is what I showed you before actually, but a little bit more illustrated here. So I start from the initial state, okay, and I have this state, and then if this demand takes place, then I will take this control action. Control actions are here, denoted by U11 in the first case, U1 after 1 hour, this means after 1 hour, I may take either this decision or that, or the other one decision, depending on what the actual water demand will be after 1 hour. On a scale from 0 to 10, how much have you got this? 10, okay. So, demand forecasting. Now, across the nodes of this tree, I may denote the nodes by k plus j, which is like the jth future stage, and I is like here, I is 1, 1 to 3, I is 1 to 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I make an enumeration here, and this is my demand forecasting. This is my input disturbance coupling, like the nodes, what comes in goes out, which here I write the equations on every single node of the tree, and finally have the dynamics. Pay a little bit of attention here to the notation. This A and C stands for ancestor. So the ancestor of this very node here is this node, and the ancestor of this node is this node. Okay, and this is how I finally formulate what we'll be solving, and I will show you now how you can solve this problem very efficiently. If you give it to Gurobi or any other commercial solver, it will take you around about half an hour to solve a decently sized problem. We can solve it, I'm telling you from now, to keep your interest a little bit high, in less than a minute. Okay, and
In an exact way.
what's it?
Eh?
Exact. Okay.
And the same quality. Okay.
Same value, yeah, same value.
The same value that Gurobi would have.
Yes, plus minus less than 0.1%.
Okay.
Yes, and this is chance constraint. I'm just mentioning it because it has received quite a lot of attention in the literature. If you assume that these are normal distributions, then you can do quite a lot of things here. You can allocate risk, for instance, because you can always tell, if you know that this is a normal distribution, you can always tell what is the probability of constraints violation, what is the probability that you flood your tanks, essentially, or that you don't satisfy the demand of the consumers. And you can, here we see the probability that the network goes bananas, and we see that it is bounded by, you can define it yourselves. You can say 1%, 0.1% probability. Okay, it's quite interesting. Algorithms now, third part of the talk. It's 2, and I have till an hour. Plenty of time. Algorithms now. I'll start with a little bit of theory, which is very essential, and then I'll move on to how you can solve these problems that we formulated previously. Okay, now the theory is very useful for solving not almost any convex optimization problem in a uniform way. So whatever problems you're encountering in your research, are they Lasso or SVM, machine learning, or neural networks, deep neural networks, whatever you like. These are complex problems, and you can solve them with this approach. I'm not proposing that this is the best way to go, but it is the best way, in my opinion, to formulate problems, and it is a quite good approach. So to start with, we have this thing here. This is called the proximal operator of a complex function. Now, many complex functions, not all of them, but most of them, have a proximal operator which is very easy to compute. I mean, seriously, very easy. I'm going to give 3 examples in what follows. The proximal operator is defined through this minimization problem, which you see here. You have the function g, and it is g plus this thing, which is a 2-norm squared norm. And it might seem a bit, it might strike you a little bit as peculiar, but trust me, let's take this example here. We have this function, which is the indicator function of a set. This means it is 0 if we're in a set. If we're in the set, everything is okay, no penalty. If we're outside the set, we have to pay an infinite cost there. So, I mean, the optimization problem is technically, practically unsolvable. Okay, so this imposes constraints. Then the proximal operator is the projection onto this set. So if you have a ball, it is very clear how you project. You take the radius that if you extend it passes through the point. Okay, it's very easy. If you have a box, again, it is very easy to project. If you write down the formula, there's a minimum and a maximum. Okay, very easy. Then, if you take the distance from a set, and this encodes soft constraint, meaning, okay, if I'm inside the set, I have to pay 0, but the more I move outside the set, I have to pay a higher and higher cost. Okay, this softens a little bit the constraints and doesn't impose so hard boundaries. Then again, the proximal operator is this formula. It doesn't matter how complicated it is. I mean, I don't know. If you ask me what is written there in the slide, I have no idea. I found it in a book, but there are such tables. I mean, this is the message I want to convey. And a very nice property we have here is that if we have many such functions combined, if we have an indicator function and a distance function and then one norm and so on, and we have a sum of them, let me give you an example. If we have an MPC problem in which we have a terminal cost which is an ellipsoid, and in the mean, in the stages in between one and the final one, we have soft constraints, and we also have some regularizers like norm 1 and so on. Then we actually have a summation of functions which are proximal, prox friendly, I call them. Then the proximal operator of the whole summation can be broken down, can be decomposed into the evaluation of the proximal operators of each individual function at each individual vector. Okay. If you didn't get it 100%, still you can understand it, can take it home. Now, proximal operators. That is one concept. I want to introduce a second one before we present the various algorithms we have in our toolbox for solving these problems. So the convex conjugate. If you're a bit familiar with Lagrangian duality, then using convex conjugates, which were introduced by Fenchel, and we're talking now about Fenchel duality, you can generalize, you can do exactly whatever you do with Lagrange duality, you can do it with Fenchel duality, easier, and you can do more than that. I mean, in Fenchel duality, you dualize the constraints of an optimization problem. Here, you learn to dualize whatever functions, actually, okay? Now, these functions, again, you can look them up in books and you can find what is the conjugate of a quadratic function, what is the conjugate of this and that function. Now, often enough, these are smooth functions, and we can take their derivative. Their derivative, if it exists, it's given by this thing. Again, a minimization problem. And often enough, these minimization problems are very easy to solve. And to solve them, and to decompose them and solve them in parallel. And finally, last thing I want you to keep in mind, too much information I know, but I promise you this is it. If we can compute proximal operator of its conjugate. Okay, through this beautiful formula, and vice versa, of course. Now then, let's rewrite, let's rethink about optimization. Usually, when you read books about optimization, they pose problems like minimize f with respect to constraints. I say no, let us write the problem as minimize f plus g, where f is a part of the problem and g is another part. F can be a quadratic function, g can be the constraint, meaning an indicator function. I just require that f and g are convex. Forget about that, that's a detail. That f is smooth and g is proximity. Mainly keep that both are convex, this is smooth, this is all the rest. Okay. Now, a last problem, L1 regularized. Let's see. I take this as the smooth part, I take this as the non-smooth part. It's nothing more marvelous than that. I mean, I'm just telling you how you can write down problems, only that. Not how to solve them, how to write them down. This is F, this is G. Let's move on. This is a box constraint to P. This is F, and this is G. So what? Wait. Now a constraint to P. This is F, this is my quadratic function F, and this is my G. And previously, this was smooth and this was prox friendly. But now this is not prox friendly. As much as you may try, you will not be able to write down a very nice formula for solving, for finding the proximal operator of this very nice thing. And this happens like in 99% of the cases that are interesting. And it happens also in stochastic optimal control. What we do in that case, we use this star function, f star and g star, to take our problem, erase it, expunge it, and write a new problem that is beautiful and nice. So f becomes f star, and g becomes g star. And now g star is prox friendly, and f star is smooth. Okay. And now we have the problem in the very nice form, okay, that will allow us to solve it very efficiently. And you can play with it. I mean, the possibilities here are endless. One thing, okay, I said that we expunge this and we write this. Of course, I meant that these are equivalent. If you can solve this problem, then you can solve that problem. And this is how they are connected. But don't mind that. Just solve this problem for y. This is our task here. Find y. You know why. And here is a very basic algorithm for doing so. The algorithm consists of two parts. What is inside the parentheses and what is outside the parentheses. Let's start from outside. Outside we have proximal operator. What did we say about proximal operators? They're extremely very easy to evaluate in software. And now let's see inside. Inside we have the gradient of f. This might be a little bit more challenging, but thankfully, more often than not, f possesses a special structure which allows us to do this efficiently, meaning in parallel. Meaning we can break this down into 1 million agents which perform the same operation all at the same time in parallel, so we save a lot of computational time. And okay, that's fine. And we can of course apply this we applied this to the original problem, we can apply it to the dual problem. Absolutely nothing changes. Inside here we have the gradient of f star, and outside we have the prox operator. The prox is tremendously easy to, etc., etc. Okay. And now we can write this neatly down. You can very easily do the math here and write this down carefully, and you will produce this thing here. So I have written it in different steps. So step number 1 is computation of the gradient. Step number 2 is computation of a proximal. And step number 3, it's nothing. I mean, this comes from the decomposition formula I showed you before, if you're very much interested in that. This comes from here. I traded f star for f, and here I made g appear in the prox, so it's proximal of g. Okay, so it's all 3 steps. Very easy step, extremely very easy step. This is a bit more interesting. Proximals are very easy, almost always, to perform. Now, this algorithm has been studied extensively in the literature and converges like 1 over k, converges like that, this far. But with a very, very simple trick, which is absolutely not easy to explain. It is a 30-page long paper by Nesterov, but it is very easy to implement nevertheless. We can replace here y with a vector w, which is produced by this very simple formula. That is a scalar, it's a number. So this is very easy to perform. This is done in microseconds. This is done in picoseconds, femtoseconds. And now still we have our task is how to compute gradient of star, proximal, and again, this is nothing. So our algorithm is here. If you want to implement it, you should start by implementing these things, and then you've done. Now this converges as 1 over k squared, so a lot faster. And again, I copied and pasted the previous slide, so this is our problem. And what should we do to apply the algorithm that I showed you? We should find what is, we should write it in the right format, right? What is f and what is g? So let's find f, let's find g here. So f is that. Oh my god. No, that's a little better. F is our the smooth part of the cost, and the dynamics, and the algebraic equations. I mean, this looks a bit messed up, but this looks a lot more neat, right? Smooth cost, we take whatever is smooth in our cost, plus the dynamics. What do I mean here by writing plus the dynamics? The dynamics are equations, okay? They are not functions, but I can take the indicator of the equations, okay? I can take the indicator function. So if the dynamics is satisfied, then I have a zero cost, because f reflects a cost. If they're not satisfied, then this is infinite, so they must be satisfied. Plus the algebraic equations. And g is all the rest, what remains. What does remain? The non-smooth cost and the constraints. What is the non-smooth cost? It is the safety operation cost, which penalizes whether I am inside, above the safety limit or below it. So if I'm above the safety limit, I have zero cost, and once I drop below the safety limit of volume of water in the tank, I will have to start to be considering to becoming back where I should be. And the further, okay, I think it's clear. A little trick here, just to play a little bit around with mathematics. This G, however, is not prox friendly. This is fine. G is not prox friendly. And why is that? Because I have the same variable here and here. Here I have a non-smooth function which is proximal. It's fine. I can find the proximal operator of that. I can find the proximal operator of that. But I cannot find the proximal operator of the sum when they share the same variable. That's not a big deal, because I can create copies of variables, x, and now look, we call it he, but let's say chi. So I say that x is equal to chi, and here is x, here is chi, so nice, and these are now different variables. And I will impose later that these are equal one to the other. Actually, let me explain that now. This is one variable, this is the other variable. This is my decision variable now, where this is equal to that. Okay, I'm saying it. And previously, my decision variables were only x and u. So this gives rise to a linear equation. T is equal to hf. Okay, not too important. And what is the dual gradient now? What is the gradient of f star? Let's take the definition. It is a minimization problem. Okay, let's write it down. When you write down minimization problems in order to solve minimization problems, it feels a bit awkward, because you say, okay, how do I solve it now? But if you take a close look, what is that actually? This is quadratic functions with respect to linear constraints. And not any linear constraints, dynamics, which is like stage-wise. x1 is related to x0 and u0. x2 is related to x1 and u1. So it has a very nice chain-like structure. And we can solve it by dynamic programming. Dynamic programming is a very popular method in optimization, that you follow this chain from the end back to the beginning, and you solve these problems in linear complexity. Okay, so what I want to say here is that this is easy. And in particular, how do we solve that? We start from the end. It doesn't show very well here. Here I've drawn some boxes, I'm not sure you can see them, meaning that here I perform matrix vector operations all in parallel. And in practice, usually we have 5,000 or 10,000 scenarios that we have to consider in the end. So imagine the benefit here is that we can do 5,000 matrix vector operations all in parallel. This costs like doing one matrix vector operation, ideally. More or less about one, however, matrix vector operation. And we have done actually thousands of such operations. Then here, next step is to do matrix vector operations plus to sum up some vectors. And then the same here, matrix vector, and I go back. Okay, and in the end, this is very efficient. This takes like a few milliseconds. And that was it, actually. That was the algorithm. And now I'm going to show you how it works and how this parallelization can be translated into tremendous speedups. Okay. First of all, this is what we're trying to achieve here. We have a controller here, a stochastic MPC controller, which takes as inputs the demand forecasts, the nominal forecasts, plus the errors in the form of a scenario tree. Okay, what may happen and with what probability. You can also feed it electricity prices or forecast electricity prices. And okay, you have a predictor here, which observes past demands and tries to predict the future. And then our controller decides some control actions, gives them to the water network, this responds, and then we take measurements, okay, and so on. Now, before I show you the results, let's see what makes a good closed behavior, what makes a well-controlled water network. So first of all, I'm saying that economic operation makes a good operation. So I have to take into account when I do simulations, I have to compute what is the cost of this operation over 1 week or 1 month or 1 year. Okay. Then I have to consider how squiggly is the operation, how aggressive is the control. So if I end up switching on and on pumps and valves, this is not very efficient. So I have to quantify these changes here, how abrupt it is. Then how safe it is, whether I store water or I use water from the storage. The storage is like you have the tank, part of the water is not to be used unless we're in a crisis, unless we have not predicted well the consumer's needs. Okay, so I quantify these in a way violations, the magnitude of these violations. And finally, how well I operate in the network in terms of how much above the safety storage I remain on average. Okay, I should remain above, I should operate the network above. Okay. Now, what do you think? What is best? To operate the network like with tanks full all the time, or close to the safety storage? Like slightly above, which is better? Slightly above, exactly. Because it is natural to infer that they have to pay a lot to keep the tanks full all the time. But slightly above, it means that I make use of the capacity and the capabilities of my network as much as possible. Okay, enough delivering. Now, first of all, we can solve it fast. And we can solve it very fast. Here is Groby. I'm showing Groby because it was the only solver, commercial or not, that was even able to solve the problem in a natural period of time, like minutes, half an hour, and so on. Simplex was not much worse, it was slightly worse, I would say like 10% more. Other solvers would make our computers crash. And this is our implementation here. We're noticing two things. First of all, that this is a lot faster than this one. And second, that the rate of growth of this one is linear. I mean, it will keep increasing like this. If you extend, it will keep increasing like this. This is not linear, this is polynomial. I mean, it has a tendency to go to infinity much faster. So this scales up properly. This doesn't. And it makes sense for various theoretical reasons as well. Gorovic uses also another algorithm, and it cannot be parallelized. And even the company that sells this software, they were considering using graphics cards for their software, but they said that it's not very suitable for their purposes because of the way the algorithm is constructed. And another thing here, blue line is economic cost, and the x-axis here is the number of scenarios. How many events I take into account, how many different things I account for when I make my plan. So if you take none, meaning if you take one actually, if you make a nominal deterministic MPC, then you have to pay a lot. At the same time, the red line is the risk of operation. At the same time, your operation will be very risky. Your risk cannot satisfy the needs of the consumers. As you add more scenarios, you will reach a minimum, and the managers have a minimum of economic cost, and the manager of the network would be willing, would be inclined to use these many scenarios. But then again, the operation is quite risky. As you add more scenarios, you have to pay more, you pay a little bit more to operate the network safer. So I think that the whole picture here makes perfect sense. You take no scenarios into account, you have to pay a lot, and it's very risky. You take some more scenarios, it will be very economic, but it will be risky. And if you want to increase the risk, you have to pay a little bit more. So I think that roundabout here is a good balance. So, or even further, I mean, this has to be considered. Taking also into account how much time it takes to solve the problem. But for 300 scenarios, it takes like less than a minute, so it doesn't matter. Something times 1 hour, or half 1 hour to make decisions. And now the closed loop simulations. Here is the cost of water. The cost profile is not constant. I mean, throughout the day, companies pay a different tariff for water, and also from region to region, the cost might be different. So actually, it's a bit tricky even to present this figure here, because we cannot dissociate the cost of one region, the cost of the other region, and the control actions we make, but nevertheless, this is the cost of two sources of water, okay? The pumping cost, and this is the pumping. And if you notice, we tend to pump when the cost of water is low, and we pump when the cost of water is high, as much as necessary only. I mean, this is the whole concept, and this is what I wanted to show here. And before I move on to conclusions, which are more like, it's not a summary of what I just said, because I think it was perfectly clear to everybody, and you have understood everything, or not. It's open problems. I've made a list of problems that I think are challenging nowadays, and you could address. Are there any questions?
One very general question is, Gabriel before this morning presented an approach that was based on case-based reasoning and machine learning by learning from the human experience. Have you compared this to the current policy that is implemented by operators
Yes.
So what is the advantage of this?
Yes, we compare to the baseline approach, exactly what is used now, but not with this controller, with a robust one, which is worse than this one. And we show that it's likely to have like 10% savings in operating cost. But now, this is not only about savings, it is also about a safe operation and proper operation of the network overall.
And would the operators like to implement these controls, or?
They get funding from the government, and they have secured profit.
Okay, well, this is a common problem of control engineers.
I would be, if I were an engineer in that company, actually, I would definitely propose its implementation, because it not only it leads to a more economic operation, which is not very much interesting for the company. I mean, okay, they'll save 10%, they can increase the tariffs by 30%, they don't care. But mainly for the more proper operation of the network overall, to maintain pressures properly, to have an uninterrupted operation, to decrease the need for intervention all the time, and making wrong decisions and so on. Anybody else?
Any other questions?
I'm trying to get a sense of the size of the application. How many decision variables and constraints are there in the application for Barcelona?
Decision variables, we have 1.9 million, considering all the scenarios and so on. Constraints, look, the dual program has a size of 2.5 and something million, so the difference is like 600,000 constraints.
Thanks.
Okay, anything else? If there are no other questions,
let's see.
sorry, there are the open problems.
Let's see what problems we have. A couple of minutes. Okay. Just one. I think one challenge is to put into the picture nonlinear dynamics to make the models more accurate. So these dynamics would describe how the network behaves in terms of pressure drops, and so on. Then risk averse. Risk averse is like something like a stochastic formulation, but to replace the expectation operator by another operator, which is a risk measure. So this tries to quantify what is the effect of the right tail of the distribution onto the operation of the network, like the extreme events. It tries to account for them. Then distributed formulations, and this is quite important. Whatever you do, when we talk about the network, it has to be implemented to some extent in a distributed way. So you cannot shut down the network one morning and then say, okay, now my controller takes over. You have to do it step by step by replacing controllers locally. Then robust economic MPC, what I mean here is that what are the actual theoretical properties of the operation of this network? Is it stable? The answer is clearly no, because trajectories go up and down. But in control, we talk a lot about stability. We talk about trajectories which go to a fixed equilibrium point. Then what is it? The answer is given by economic MPC, which has been developed only in a deterministic context. It is challenging to see how it goes in a stochastic one. And to answer questions like, is it performing better than deterministic MPC, than something else? Is it recursively feasible? Faster algorithms. I mean, already we're working on a version of an algorithm which exhibits a speed up of minimum by a factor of 3 compared to what I showed. And that's it. Thank you very much.